So my name is Robbert Van Renesse, and I think one of the reasons they asked me to speak today is because I'm the only one who can pronounce Kristen's last name. So we were asked to do a keynote. I usually will use slides and stuff like that. We don't have any slides, so it'll be off the cuff. And we're going to talk a little bit about the technology and invention itself, and then maybe also a little bit about how founding the company and everything, then proceeded. So I'm going to start a little bit with the story of the invention, and I think the thing that's interesting about that story is the many pivots we went through until we found something that actually some people were interested in. And the story actually goes back to around 2012. And I was not involved at the time, but my colleague here, Hakim, had a student, Dan Williams, and they wrote a paper about a system that was called Sand Blanket. And to explain that a little bit, I want to tell you, so we're doing work in cloud infrastructure. So let me talk a little bit about I understand cloud to be. It's just maybe not exactly what you think cloud is. So cloud to us is it's an infrastructure, a place where you can buy or rent resources where you can run your compute services, so you can store things there. And particularly that renting out compute is something that we were looking at. So you can buy something called a virtual machine and rent a virtual machine for a certain amount of time, and then you can run your favorite compute service there. But when you do that, you're kind of stuck with that particular cloud. Every cloud is a little different. You got Amazon Cloud, you got Google Cloud, you got Microsoft Azure. There were others, so the Zen Blanket was a very interesting technology because it actually allowed you to move your application, the service you were running in the cloud, from one cloud to another. And while it's running, it was only down for like maybe a second or a couple of seconds in between. So very smoothly you could go from one cloud to another. And then we were getting involved at the time. But I think the main motivation for that was something called vendor locking. Like every cloud is a little different. So it's really want to keep customers where they are. So it's Hakim here, with Dan Williams came up with a technology that allowed you to move your application just willy-nilly as you see fit. So that way, you could always go to the cloud where you want it to be, maybe the one that had the least cost, and so on. Because in any case, this is around the time that I got involved when we were thinking about, okay, what can we do with this technology? And we came up with an idea called the super cloud. We said, okay, maybe we can build one big cloud across all these different clouds out there. And people that want to use the cloud can run their services across multiple clouds. And then they can do very interesting things. This is sort of, like instead of just thinking about vendor locking, it's like, okay, maybe we can move services around to close where the clients are. So every time you go to the cloud, it takes some time to get to your service. The closer your particular machine is to where you're running, the lower the latency, the faster service. And they actually have done studies that every millisecond actually counts. Like the cloud companies or people that were using the cloud were losing money just because of 1 or 2 milliseconds difference in response times. Anyway, so that was our next thing that we were thinking about. Okay, maybe we can reduce response time, and this concept of follow the cloud. I guess people were using your application, during the day somewhere. We would just migrate your application around the globe with the sun, so that it's always near the customers. Then there was a new thing that came around, which was something called containers. And that was actually the thing that we ended up disclosing to CTL. So there was a new technology that allowed you to package your application, something called containers. And we had a really nice technology to put a very strong security barrier. It's still the same hammer. It's all nice virtual migration. And so we came up with a technology called X containers. allowed you to build applications that were highly secure. And actually, we also had a great trick to improve their performance. This is what we disclosed, and this is what we were thinking that we would eventually commercialize. So we ended up, thinking about starting a company and in the security space mostly, and also maybe performance. This is how we, that was still the same hammer. And this is when we started sort of talking to various customers, and we did iCore and what have you in order to get things off the ground. And so, and then, after talking to 100 plus or something like that, customers, we figured out nobody was interested. It sounded good to us, you don't want to get your name in the newspaper, but every company felt our security is basically good enough, our performance is good enough. That's not the problem. So eventually we figured out that our hammer had yet another use case, which was improving utilization. So it actually turns out that many of these services you rent in the cloud are highly underutilized. Why? Because, well, you need to prepare for the worst case. So what do? You rent a very big machines, and you then pay for that very big machine, which you might only use like part of the day, and so that's pretty expensive. And so by what we with again our hammer you could do is you could move your application from a small machine to a big machine, and from the big machine back to a small machine. So while the load was low, you just moved your application to a small machine, or while the load was high, you moved it to a big machine. So that was that allows you to only pay for what you need. There was also another thing that was possible in the cloud. They had something called the stock market, where if you only so stock market is something provides this underutilized resources. If they couldn't rent it out, they would give for a fraction of the price. But the problem is they want to be able to take it back at any time. Well, this was also perfect for a technology, so we could run something in the stock market, and when they wanted it back, they just move it out again. It's a little more complicated than that. But in any case, that was a way to reduce the price of cloud resources for our customers, and so that's eventually what people got interested in. This is what our company Exostellar was built around, improving utilization by doing these kinds of tricks. And eventually, we also figured out how to improve utilization for these things called GPUs, which is used for AI, and of course that's what eventually Qualcomm was interested in. But I think at this point I should probably hand it over to Hakim.
First of all, thank you for ETL. Thank you everybody here at Ithaca and everybody at Cornell Wild in New York City. So a few things. First of all, Robbert and I have been friends for over a quarter century. So we met in 2001 or so. I was a grad student at that time, and he was a research professor here. So we've been friends for over 25 years. So that's number one. Number two is we are inventors. So I'll say serial inventors. Everybody here, we want to add to the body of knowledge, right? That's the pursuit of a PhD, pursuit of research and whatnot, is to add new to the body of knowledge. Robbert is the godfather of the cloud. So he's actually being humble. So he is what you would call the godfather of the cloud. How is he the godfather? He's a godfather because he hired a guy named Werner Vogels. So if you look up Werner Vogels is a person who essentially created Amazon Web Services. He popularized it. Well, Werner Vogels is also the CTO for Amazon. He worked for Robbert. Robbert hired him in the 90s, and they wrote a bunch of papers together. They then created a company in the late 90s that they then sold to Amazon, I think at the end of the bubble bust. So Amazon bought it for pennies on the dollar or whatnot, but Werner then went to Amazon and created Amazon Web Services. So Robbert's a godfather. As far as myself, so around the same time, I was a grad student, and my thesis was based off of storage. And so we wanted to store data for everybody in the world. My advisor loved the number Avogadro's number. So 6 times 10 to 23. So we want to store a mole of bytes, data for the entire world, for your entire life without losing a bit. That was my thesis. Okay, so how do you even get to 10 to the 23? You have 10 billion people, 10 to 10. Each person has 10,000 files, and then you have 9 gigabyte per file. Okay, so that's 10 to 23. That was my thesis that we wrote up in 1999, got published in 2000. Almost 20 years later, it received the most influential paper award for laying the foundations for cloud storage. Okay. So that's Robbert and I, 2 amigos, 2 friends, 2 co-inventors. Okay, so we love to add to the body of knowledge, and as you know, it's free for other people to consume and to hopefully duplicate. We hadn't really thought about, or I hadn't really thought about being an inventor. So you're writing a publication. If you want to then do what everybody has here done, you then do a disclosure. Right? So you have a discovery. Is that where it ends? What happens after the discovery? So that's where the entrepreneurship and whatnot that we have gone on this journey together started. So I want to tell you a little bit about our story to take off where Robbert left off. I'll say one other thing just as a point of trivia. Okay, so point of trivia, you can ask me this later on. I had played football in a past life. Okay, so I played football at University of Washington, and there's this article that's written about me. It's called Hakim Weatherspoon, Head in the Clouds. It's Not a Bad Thing. So it talks about this whole journey. You can read it. In that article, it said that I could bench press 350 pounds. So people read that, they don't know anything else. Could you actually bench press 350 pounds? The answer is yes, I could. I can't now. So that's going to come back into play. So the key here is that we are serial inventors, if you will, just like everybody here. We love to add to the body of knowledge. And like what Robbert said, when we discovered something that was mobile, secure, fast, we thought, people may actually want to pay for this. How do we then go along that journey? So it's really here at CTL and Cornell that helped us along the way. So we are serial entrepreneurs, and we want to then learn how to translate from research into practice, into impact. Some of the things that we did when we made that discovery, if you will, is we then talked to our chair. Our chair is the provost. She was the chair at the time, Kavita Bala. And Kavita Bala had just had a company that she sold to Facebook at the time. It's called Rockstar. So she set us up. She said, here's what to do. So it was the chair. Tell us what to do. Go down to the Commons and talk to Kirk McAleeney and go talk to the Rev and do all this stuff. So we did that. So we talked to Kirk McAleeney. We went to the Rev. The Rev, they told us to do an I-Core. So Bradstreet taught a 2-week I-Core course where you then get out and talk to companies. We talked to 30 companies. One was my neighbor, who Autodesk, as they'll come back into play. And then after that, we decided, this is interesting. People may actually pay for it. So we then incorporated. So this is all 2018. We created a company. We filed for a National Science Foundation Small Business Innovation Research Grant, SBIR. And 6 months later, we would have got it, but the government shut it. So 3 months later, we got that as 2019, $250,000. And did another small I-Core and whatnot. But we did the big thing that we did that Robbert mentioned was a national I-Core. So we did a national I-Core, and we talked to 100 companies over 7 weeks. This is 2019. At that time, you had to talk to a company in person. We said, we don't care where that company is. If they're in Iceland, damn it, fly to Iceland. And talk to them in person for 20 minutes. And so we did that. Every week we had 15 companies. We thought we were security, like Robbert said. But after about the 90th interview, so there's something magical about wondering. After about the 90th interview, we started to hear a signal, which was people were, security was an issue, but they were unhappy how much they're paying. And we had this mobility that we could do something about. So we pivoted in the summer of 2019. We actually changed our SBIR, the phase 2, to this cloud optimization. And by the beginning of 2020, we had a MVP. Okay, so, but what happened in 2020? Everything shut down. So in 2020, we applied for this phase 2. We didn't get it. We're running out of money. We then apply, Scott, over here, we then apply for the payment protection plan. We get that. We were introduced to Launch New York. They said we will lead around. We then get introduced to Ithaca area development. We talk to the Red Bear Angels. We get introduced to Praxis, excuse me. So all of these local resources that then help guide us. We were an early recipient of an Ignite Award all around this time. And almost overnight, our fortunes changed from, the scary time to now raising $1 million. So we raised $1 million in like April, May, June of 2020. From that point, so that was led by Launch New York. We also had New York State Development. We also were a startup New York company. So all of this was New York resources. About 7 months later, we then were introduced to California. So this is California man. We were introduced to Lip Tan. If you look him up, he's a CEO of Intel. So we pitched, he wasn't the CEO of Intel at the time, but we pitched in front of him. He was excited and he led our Series C. So we then raised $1 million in 2019. We raised $5 million in 2021. Between 2020 and 2021. He led that round. From that, we had doubled from 3 people to 6 to 12. Okay. And then in 2022, we raised 15 million. And so each year we were able to raise even more money. But at that point, then I'll conclude, I was CEO that entire time. At that point, we had essentially went from invention lab to some level of translation. Autodesk and some Synopsys, some other companies were using our technology. Argonne National Labs, Idaho National Labs, okay? And so at that point, we then hired a CEO out of Microsoft to come be our CEO. And I came back. So we got to add the lab. We had some level of translation. We went from the body of knowledge to now some level of impact. So the last 2 notes, and then to conclude, is we have had this acquisition, which is very exciting. But that's not where it started. It actually started, if anything, the acquisition of like chapter 8. It's really that invention, the disclosure, the prototypes, the NSF I-Core, the guidance that we had received to others in all chapters 1 through 7. And then the acquisition is chapter 8. And so just to leave you guys on some parting thoughts and takeaways. There's 3. One is you don't have to wait for the perfect solution. You probably don't have it to begin with. Instead, you have to be agile, move fast and break things. I don't know if that's Mark's like. The second thing is commercialization. That is research as well. That's what we learned from the NSF I-Core program, is that you have to then talk to the market, if you will, to figure out what people will actually pay for, what they need, what they're missing, what is a high demand. And then the last thing is, impact outside of the lab is that translation piece. So here at Cornell, we have extraordinary inventors like yourselves, and we love to add to the body of knowledge. But that's not where things end. They actually end in that translation, which is how do you get things into people's hands, something that they're missing. So everybody who's sitting right here, you have that level of disclosure already, and you may actually have that next entrepreneur. So take this as an invitation to take that next step.